Forbes Books presents Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow. Transformation for a new and better world. Here's David.
Thanks for joining me for the conclusion of my talk with Jack Derby, a longtime professor of the practice in entrepreneurship, marketing, and sales at Tufts University and MIT. Jack, I'd love to talk about your teaching style. In part one, you spoke about your time at the Peace Corps volunteer in Tanzania. You said something like, if I could ever teach, I wouldn't teach the way I learned, I'd teach another way. Could you explain what your thought process was and what you meant by that?
How do we politely say this? I am older. Not old, I am older. So, but that was the way of teaching back in the day. Went to Boston College, a wonderful institution. Went there as a biology and English major of all things. In that time, you'd open up your book, you would read some stuff, you would take elaborate notes, you would read them again, you would copy them, you would study those notes, study your book, you'd have an exam, and you would do it again and again and again. And that wasn't necessarily just BC, that was the way most courses were, lecture halls, or at the best, maybe 40 people, and that's what it was. That was my education. Lucked into going overseas for 3 years in the Peace Corps, 2 years and then 1 year. And I started teaching. I had no teaching background, of course. That didn't stop the U.S. government from saying you should be able to teach. And I taught languages, obviously English as a foreign language. And I realized that I really knew nothing about education, but Peace Corps trained us for all of 3 months. And I came back to the United States. And then, as I said, I lucked into industry. I always understood that education could be better. But I really didn't worry about that because I was working, my normal 12 and 14-hour days. I realized, though, growing up in a large corporation, a wonderful corporation, that a lot of that came back to teaching, it came back to training, it came back to education, not in a classroom, but in real scenarios of solving problems. Then I got this opportunity. I did a lot of volunteer work at MIT, and I got this opportunity as a result of that to get this call from the department head of mechanical engineering. And Jung-Hoon Chun, who I still work with, no longer the department head, said, "Well, would you help us teach?" And I said, "Jung-Hoon, I'm not terribly sure that you know I know nothing about mechanical engineering." To which he responded, "Jack, we got that covered. What I need somebody who can teach my students who are deep into mechanical engineering something about business planning, sales stuff. How do you market?" That began 21 years ago. We are kicking off the fall course in a couple of weeks. That then taught me about what higher ed education should become. Again, we go back to that content in context thing. I learned that actually Jung-Hoon allowed me to do that within his coursework. And so when I got the opportunity to come to Tufts about 16 years ago, I just said, "Would you let me teach the way I would like to teach?" And the department head said, "Sure, why not?" Because there really was no great textbook. First course was marketing, and there was no textbook, quite frankly. I mean, the textbook was 6 years, sounded like the internet had just been invented, and there really was nothing else. And I was replacing somebody, and quite frankly, the department head was desperate. It was in August. And so that's what I began. And it's been a wonderful experiment, a refinement since then.
Jack, the name Jack Derby is synonymous with entrepreneurship at both MIT and Tufts. You've taught sales and marketing at Tufts for 2 decades, and now your name will be connected to Tufts in perpetuity thanks to the Derby Entrepreneurship Center. Why was it so important to you to grant that $9 million endowment? And we'll touch base on the $1 million support after that in a second.
Well, I'm getting a chill when I'm saying this to you. That really comes back. Tufts it's a privilege to No BS. It is a privilege. Every single course, every single working on the syllabus, walking into a class, I get both frightened and excited because it's a process. And Tufts has been very good for me. It's been a privilege to teach there. And all the time, Dave, there's probably some deeper rooting thing of my time in classrooms at BC and at Chicago, but all the time I kept saying, gee, this is really working out pretty cool. I would be able to get my kids jobs. And boy, you know what I'd like is that sometime somebody, when I'm no longer teaching, says, who was that guy? Because now I have sisters and brothers of. My guess is I'll keep teaching and I'll soon have daughters and sons. I've already got the sons and daughters of friends of mine, and I started recruiting them when they were in high school. So what I'd like to believe is somebody says, who was that guy? And the way I wanted to identify that was to put something in hard physical reality, which led Jan and me to talk about why don't we endow Tufts with this gift. So that for me is I don't know how else to say this. It's like a sacred privilege. The fact that the Derby Entrepreneurship Center will go on for a long time. That funny word that you use, which I can't pronounce, in perpetuity, for a long time. And that for me is exciting. It'll be there. And then there will be the sons and the daughters of my alums who say, gee, I'm going here because my mother went here. And so that's the second thing, David, is that I think the Entrepreneurship Center at Tufts is extraordinary because Tufts is very different. We're a tier one school. We're very, very different than the majority of schools. And bringing entrepreneurship, and I would add to that entrepreneurship and innovation, to this highly innovative university is really what I would like to do. And I think we can do that with a couple of bucks and then figuring that out. It will be different. There are, as I said, a lot of business schools. Tufts doesn't have one, probably won't have one for a long time, if ever. But what Tufts does have is very unique schools. You and I would call them colleges. Well, I guess you and I would call them schools, both being Tufts. And if we can bring entrepreneurship and innovation to those schools, the School of Medicine, for example, one of the top-rated medical, Tisch, for example, of civic life, one of the top. If we can bring that to the Fletcher, probably the number one, maybe the number two development of international relationships in the world. If we can bring entrepreneurship and innovation to that school, then that's really part of the mission here. And short-term mission, by the way. I think we can make a dramatic difference. Now, having said that, my intent, now I'm just the gifter, right? It's a unrestricted gift to the School of Engineering. That's where the Entrepreneurship Center sits. So I'm not going to, don't want to dictate where the money goes. It's an unrestricted gift to SOE, School of Engineering. I do believe that we can do some unique things, but I have no intent of competing against those wonderful schools who have entrepreneurship at their center. MIT, Berkeley, Babson. There's no desire nor intent to try to compete with those. But we can do something very different. And I'm going to unfold that during the next year.
Okay, it's coming attractions to look forward to it.
I think so.
You also have a $1 million support a new multidisciplinary academic building and names its first floor atrium as the Jack and Jan Derby Lobby, named after you and your wife Jan. And strong partners that have been a recurring theme on this podcast. What has the ride been like with Jan at your side?
No, I think we should end the conversation. So, Jan is a wonderful entrepreneur, a business person, came out of director of nursing, nurse practitioner, one of the first in the country, actually in the first cohort in the country, rose to be director of nursing at a large university hospital. And and it wasn't me, when I was at Becton Dickinson, we felt that our salespeople could be better. They were great people and great salespeople. And on the clinical side, they were okay. We built ICU, CCU hardware, things that go beep in the night in an ICU. And my thought process was we could try to educate those salesmen, mostly men, if not all of them, about 50 people, or we could bring in experts. And that's what we did. And we identified Jan as our first clinical specialist. She came in, she set up the clinical specialist department, not working for me, but for the head of sales. And then we got connected. And so we've had a long background of being involved in business. Jan is clearly an entrepreneur. She is an artist and she paints, she does metalwork. We live here on the beach in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Rye, New Hampshire, actually. And Jan is a sea glass artist. She is classic entrepreneur and keeps inventing that thing. The relationship, we don't have kids, and the relationship then works very, very well in terms of doing these things. At a point, we are getting older, and I said to Jan, well, gee whiz, why don't we? And she said, sure. When we looked at that, and I had the opportunity because of Tufts and being the director of the center and being named the Cummings Professor of the practice, of getting to know Bill and Joyce together. Extraordinary, just extraordinary entrepreneurs in all of the aspects of the world. And I got to know them very well. As I was running the center when I was director, Bill gifted to the university what we're calling now the Gateway Building. So as you know only too well, David, in the Medford Somerville campus, we have a very large facility that spreads across numbers of streets and has different locations. This magnificent building will now become the gateway, if you will, to Tufts. The state is completing, and it will be complete in February, pretty much around the same time the building will be. They are completing the digging of a T station there, a subway station there. So not only will it be the gateway, it will be that access point into our Boston campus. And our Boston campus is where the nutrition school, where the medical school, where the dentistry school is located. And that will be very defined. So when I thought about doing this in terms of the gift, I called Bill and I said, and the building is going to be named the Joyce Cummings Building. And Joyce has been very instrumental in her work at Tufts. And I said, gee, Bill, I'd like to give some money. And what would you think? And he was way ahead of me. And he said, sure, no, we'd like that. And I wanted to explain what that would be. And he said, no, we've decided. How would you name that? And of course, it had to be now Jan and I did have a conversation as to whether it would be the Jan and Jack or the Jack and Jan. But we're very excited about this. This building is magnificent. And as all of the buildings are, because this is a unique campus, the Medford Somerville campus. But to be associated with Joyce, Bill, and doing that atrium thing was just wonderful, wonderful place. So that's it's a $10 million unrestricted gift. $1 million of that goes to the naming of the atrium, the lobby, if you will, two-story, just a wonderful place. And then the balance is to SOE.
That's truly awe-inspiring. One wall in your office is covered with thank you notes from students. Is that your true legacy, your impact on students?
Yeah, no question. And students, you, Dave, anybody can just, once you get an email from me, just go to under my picture and say book time with Jack. And so, I don't do a lot of time, but if a student says, matter of fact, they don't even have to ask. It's just like book time with Jack, and somebody's going to send a 15-minute book time and go over their career. Hey, think about when, well, certainly I'm a bad example because out of BC, it was Peace Corps, that was the end of it. Didn't know anything about it afterwards. But the majority of students, even as juniors, are saying, I think, I'm sure, I'm not sure. Talked to this woman yesterday. She's not one of my students. She's interning for one of my students at a very large corporation, excuse me, for one of my alums. So Matt was a student of mine 13 years ago, an executive at a very large financial services company. He hired this woman as an intern for the summer. She's still there. Call yesterday, Matt set it up, was, gee, can you talk to me about some career choices? So I love that conversations. I'm looking at a little note came in July 17th. It's from Sam Kessel. And Jack, it was a pleasure speaking with you today. I hope to stay in touch more regularly in the future. You are my favorite Tufts professor. After all, I'm glad to hear you and your wife are staying COVID free. Sam just graduated from medical school. Wow. So I get a chill. Yeah, I put them on my bulletin board here. I mean, nobody comes to my office, but it is the excitement. And I think it is the responsibility. It's just, it's what you do. And you, David, anybody listening to this podcast can make a significant difference in a young man, young woman, and it just takes time. Now, do you do what I do? It takes a ton of time, but that's all I do. But it makes a huge amount of difference just to listen to somebody who is sitting there at the age of 19, 21 and saying, I haven't got a clue. Maybe I should go to graduate school. So that's very, very exciting. And that's why, again, the focus back to Tufts, it works out, the ability to recruit young people out of high school coming there, just very, very exciting. And the wheel keeps turning.
Turning to something slightly different as we focus a little bit how people can reach out to you. Funny enough, on your LinkedIn profile, list your position at Derby Management as head coach. Can you explain what drove you to play head coach on your profile?
Sure, pretty simple. I was afraid to call myself CEO because it was at the point when I started it, it was me in the corner of my living room in Boston. And so I didn't say, well, it's kind of like not when I was CEO at Datamedics Corporation, which was the spin out of the Becton Dickinson division. So I didn't know what else to call me. Managing partner, guy, that was for the big venture firms. And so I did this head coach. I'm actually, after all these years, thinking of now changing that. Not really sure. Quite frankly, that came from one of my students now at McKinsey, and he said, well, why do you call yourself head coach? And I went through the same explanation. He said, well, Jack, I've known you for a long time. It kind of like sounds a little amateurish. And I don't know. Anyways, so right now, I'm known as the head coach, and it's a double entendre. It is when I'm working with typically our customers, well, not typically, all of the time, our customers are the senior management team. That might be the president/CEO, might be the VP of marketing, might be the VP of sales. Those are our personas that we at Derby Management work with. And so the double entendre is, yes, I'm a head coach but now there are, employees and whatever else. But also we spend a lot of time individually and I personally, but the guys do the same, working within the head of those leaders. Sometimes it's just we're a confidential sounding board. People say, okay, I call up numbers of our CEOs every single week. How are we doing? I know when to call them, that I'm not going to be interrupting them. It's hard to run a business, David, isn't it? You're a perfect example in Eggland. It's hard to do that. I don't care if you're the head of McKinsey. Of course, that's a bad example because I've never done that. If you're the head of Becton Dickinson by yourself, you've got to have somebody that you will ultimately confess to. So in my running of businesses, it's always been my CFO. I hired the best CFOs, not just because they were good at accounting, but they were good business people. And I would tell them everything. And that became my person that I would work with. As I grew in companies, did some startups, I had boards, and I'd always identify an individual on my board, whether I was the CEO or a board member, with whom I could be brutally honest all the time. And that relationship. And so I've identified that, brought it over to this side of the table. Now, that coaching stuff is focused heavily on business planning, sales planning, and marketing planning, rather than just being a coach for how are you doing? What's the future be? Some of our CEOs use us for that, but the primary focus, it all goes back to the rooting of tactical plans. And a question we always ask, if this were now August of 2022, what would success look like to you? I want to hear that from that man, from that woman who says, yeah, success would look like this. So now we've got a little anchor, and I can coach to that anchor. That's really the actuality. But it's a good question you bring up in terms of the term. 20 years later, I'm thinking about, I don't know, maybe changing the term.
There's a lot of duality between athletics and business and coaching business. So, certainly you're within the characterization to call yourself a head coach and an extraordinary head coach at that. I wanted to lastly give you an opportunity to share the most important lesson learned that we can take away from Jack Derby.
To me, it's pretty simple. And really now it becomes, maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's because it is to keep learning. It's as simple as that. If you think in your practice or in your work or in your teaching or in your whatever that you're the best, you probably aren't. And so the question becomes one of continuing to learn. Maybe that's in a classroom. I really thought about this fall semester. Now, I'm not doing it. I decided, so I teach every fall at MIT, only in the fall. I teach every semester at Tufts in terms of the marketing course, and only in the fall in terms of the sales science of sales course. I'll probably do that next spring also. I seriously thought, David, of not doing one of those things and beginning a process, taking a course at MIT. Let me just get that out. Actually, beginning an MBA program at MIT. So I said to myself, gee, are you crazy in doing that? And I didn't. I decided I wouldn't do that because I got too much stuff going on now with this gift. I've got a research project that I want to pull off this fall. But my point is, at this time, at this age, I know a lot of stuff about sales and marketing, a lot of business planning. I think I could do better. So I think that's my point. You got to keep, for two reasons. You got to keep, everybody needs to continue to learn. In a classroom, that would be ideal. Online, of course, it's so easy. By yourself, sure, why not, as long as you're disciplined. And never accept that you know enough. That does two things. One, it makes you feel good. And that feeling good is carried over, I believe, to your health. And if you are physically taking care of yourself and you're not being struck by disease or cancer or anything else, and hopefully that isn't the case. But then if you think well about yourself and you think about getting educated and you practice that, you're going to be healthier. And that's just going to keep you alive for a long time. So to me, the simplicity of it is actually pushing yourself to keep learning.
Jack, I can't thank you enough. It's been an extraordinary time learning, and I certainly hope that the listeners have learned as much as I have. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. Thank you very much for your time, and it was an extraordinary gift on behalf of a lot of people at Tufts and outside of Tufts that care about entrepreneurship, growth, and revenue, and focus on this. You've just been wonderful, and you've lived an absolutely extraordinary, hardworking life.
David, I appreciate your time. Looking forward to seeing you on campus. Thank you very much.
To connect with David, go to davidradlow.com. David's book, Principles of Cartel Disruption, Accelerate and Maximize Performance, is now available wherever books are sold. This has been Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow, a presentation of Forbes Books.